Hey there folks! For those of you that follow this channel, you know that during the summertime, if I'm not out kayak fishing, then I'm up on a small mountain stream chasing trout with my fly rod. Today I want to go over my top 5 fly patterns for fly fishing in small mountain streams. Now, one of the great benefits of fishing in small mountain streams is that these areas are less pressured, so the trout there haven't seen as many flies presented to them. And additionally, these systems tend to be far less productive than the larger river systems downstream, where those fish can be a little more choosy about eating what drifts by. These fish in smaller mountain streams will tend to eat a lot of what's presented to them, but not everything, and that's why I wanted to go over some of the reasons why I choose these different flies, because it allows me to work the whole stream system. There's a lot of micro habitats that you want to be able to reach when you're out fishing on these small streams, and so having at least these 5 flies will help make for a more productive day when you're out on those streams. That they're going to feed on. They might be feeding on the surface, that is, they're going to be picking off terrestrial insects that are falling into the stream, which is something that happens quite a bit as we move into the summer and there's lots of productivity in the forest. So this might be things like grasshoppers, crickets, beetles, spiders. And then they also might be feeding on the surface on the adult forms of aquatic insects that are emerging or coming back to lay their eggs. So this is things like mayflies, stoneflies, and so on. But the bulk of what trout feed on, or how they feed in streams, is under the surface, so subsurface, primarily feeding on drifting nymphs. These are aquatic insects that have broke loose and are drifting downstream or are dispersing downstream. Additionally, you might get terrestrial insects that have sunk and gone down into the water column and are drifting downstream, and they might feed on those as well. So while dry flies are really fun to fish and it's exciting to see the fish come up and take them, if you really want to catch lots of fish, it's better to fish nymphs. I try to keep a nice balance in my top 5 list because of that, though, because I do really enjoy watching those trout come up and sip and smash those flies on the surface. So where I live, we have primarily 3 different types of trout that I'll find in our streams, and it may vary depending on where you live and which part of the country. But here we have rainbow trout, primarily native red band trout, but we also have cutthroat trout, and we also have non-native brook trout. And when those 2 species, when some of those species overlap, it fundamentally changes their feeding behavior, and thus if you want to target one species over another, you might need to be aware of how those feeding differences are, which is why it's good to have a variety of flies when you target these small streams. So for example, some early research in the 1970s in North Idaho showed that in streams where cutthroat trout and brook trout overlapped, that fundamentally changed the feeding behavior of those 2 different fish. So for example, the cutthroat trout when they overlap with brook trout, tend to feed in faster moving water. They tend to feed more on the members of the order Diptera, which is the fly family. So they're occupying further up in that of the pool where it's shallower, faster moving water, whereas the brook trout were occupying slower moving water, and we're feeding more on Trichoptera, which is the members of the caddisfly family. So you can see, if you understand how these species feed and how they interact, then it might change on what presentation you're going to use and thus which fly you might use. Okay, so let's get started with this top 5 list real quick. We're going to start on the bottom and we're going to work our way up to the surface. So the first fly I'm going to go with is this caddisfly imitation here. This is from Big Y Fly Company. You'll notice that a lot of the flies I'm going to present today are not going to be exceptionally large nor exceptionally small. Small flies and big flies work just as well, but the reason why I like sort of the size 8s all the way to size 12 hooks is because, for one, they're a lot easier to tie on. 2, they're a little bit more durable than smaller flies, and the bigger flies, I'm always a little bit worried about the damage the hook might cause to the fish. Those larger hooks on these small fish can potentially damage the eyes or go into the brain, so I try and use a moderate size fly here. So this small caddis can be tumbled along the bottom. It is weightless. It doesn't really have any copper wire or lead wire wrapped inside of it. So it kind of tumbles along nicely, and it can be used to sort of drift through mid-depths, or you can allow it to sort of roll along the bottom, and it can be very productive. Now, number 4 on my list is going to be the Bead's hair beaded nymph, or sometimes called the all-purpose nymph. There's really not much to this. It tends to have a bead head, a little bit of a hackled tail, and then they use some dubbing to make the body, and there's usually a little bit of flash incorporated into the back here. That just helps attract the fish's attention. These come in many different colors. They're very affordable to buy. It's almost cheaper to buy them than it is to tie them yourself. And they're very effective, especially at fishing those deeper, faster moving pools where you want to get down to those larger fish. One of the things that a lot of studies have shown is that fish will divvy up the habitat, with the larger fish occupying the best habitat in terms of intercepting insects as they drift by. Okay, third on my list is a fly that is really good at targeting that mid-column water depth. So those fish that are feeding on suspended invertebrates as they drift by, and that is the soft hackle nymph. It's a very simple fly. It's totally unweighted, so it drifts really naturally through the water column, and it just has a really strong buggy look underwater. Now, what's interesting about the soft hackle fly is that it's widely used across the globe by lots of different fly anglers, but in Europe and North America, we tend to tie our soft hackle flies with the hackle going backwards. This gives it kind of a nice spidery looking thing when it gets wet. It just has a very buggy look. But if we look at a soft hackle fly from Japan, in what they call the kabari fly, they actually tie their hackle forward. And this allows you to pulse the fly a little bit and add some action to it, because as you pulse the fly, it actually creates this little umbrella kind of flexes right here, creating a little bit of action. Either way, doesn't matter which one you choose to fish, they're both very effective, and they're both extremely easy to tie. You can tie one in under 2 minutes easily, even if you're a beginner, and you can probably tie them in less than under a minute after you have some experience. So I'm going to show you quickly how to tie a soft hackle fly. All right, to tie my soft hackle fly, I'm going to use a size 12 scud hook. You can use any size and shape of hook you want. I just happen to like the curved shape of scud hooks. I think it gives the fly a really nice shape. You can use any kind of thread you want. I've even used sewing thread because I think the sewing thread has a nice texture and it gives the body a nice shape. It doesn't really matter at this point. Some scissors, and then I'm going to use some pheasant here. I'll probably use the feathers off the back here to tie this fly. I'm going to tie a forward-facing hackle fly, but you can do this in any direction that you want. All right, so to start with, we're just going to take and wrap some thread and just get this started. I'm going to wrap back to just above the point and then back forward again. And then I'm going to clip off the excess. Now I'm just going to build up the body, and like I said, you can do any colors you want here, but the whole point of this fly is that it's very simple, it's very effective, it doesn't need to be overly complicated, which is why a lot of the commercial trout fishermen historically in Japan who would go up in the mountains and catch trout to bring back to market to sell would tie a lot of these soft hackle flies, just because they could produce so many very quickly. All right, I've just built up a little bit of a body there. I'm going to grab a feather, maybe off the nape of this hen pheasant. You can use any feathers that you want, chicken feathers, quail feathers, it doesn't really matter, grouse. Okay, next, since I have my feather, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the tip of this feather, and then I'm going to stroke the feather back like that, so that I have a little tip faced like that. That's going to be the point at which I'm going to tie in. So I'm just going to lay that gap right down there on the feather and do 3 or 4 wraps, and then I can trim the excess. Then I'll just grab this feather shaft and just do a couple wraps, and then I'll just work around tying in just behind the head. If I was going to tie a backwards facing hackle, I'd tie in front and push the feathers backwards. If I'm tying a forward facing hackle, I'm going to wrap in behind the feather and push them forward. So then I'm just going to clean up some of the little excess that I have in behind, which would be better done with finer point scissors, but I'm just showing that it can be done with anything that you have laying around. Then I'll just go back over the back with more thread to cover up some of those loose fibers, or those loose feathers. Build up the body, and here you can see I have a nice forward-facing hackle fly. I'm just going to do a couple knots, overhand knots behind the back there. Maybe clean up that one little wayward feather, not that the trout actually cares about that. And there you go. And then what I'll do just to make this fly last a little bit longer is I'll just put a dab of super glue on the back side there. I can use my scissors or whatever I want. This just makes it so I can catch multiple trout on that same fly. It'll last a little longer. And that's it. That's your soft hackle fly tied in no time. Okay, for my 4th fly, we're going to go up to dry flies now and start talking about surface feeding. And my #1 favorite dry fly pattern is the parachute Adams. Now, there's a bunch of different variations of the Adams. The parachute version has this little clump of extra hair tied onto the top, and that helps give it a little more buoyancy, a little bit bigger profile. And the reason I like that is because on these small mountain streams, it's really hard for me to keep track of my dry fly because there's lots of bubbles and there's lots of riffles and things like that. There's not these big glassy sections of water that I'm fly fishing. And so being able to see the fly and see the fish take the fly is as important as the fish being able to see the fly. And so having this little parachute here helps me see the fly, and I'm sure it helps drag the tension from the fish down below as well. It also makes it a little bit more buoyant, so you're not always having to replace your dry flies as they get soaked. I do always put a little bit of silicone gel on my dry flies just to help give them that extra buoyancy, because you're going to be catching lots of fish, so it's nice to be able to not have to worry about replacing those flies and drying them out frequently. So the parachute Adams comes in many different color variations, but I just happen to love this one with the purple body. This is called the Purple Haze. It just, for some reason, trout everywhere, no matter if I'm fishing in mountain streams in Pennsylvania or mountain streams in Washington State or Colorado, they just love purple, and brook trout especially. And I really have a soft spot for brook trout. I just love to catch those fish, and they love purple. So this is the Purple Haze Parachute Adams. Okay, and my 5th and final fly is one of my favorites. I keep saying that, but I love all these flies. That's why they're in my top 5, is the hippie stomper. So the hippie stomper is a foam-based fly. So you'll see it has this foam body, and here again I'm running purple. I have a thing for purple. And then you'll see it has a little bit of that sort of parachute type material again tied into the top. Now what I like about the hippie stomper and this foam fly is foam flies are incredibly durable. They just keep going. They can get beat up. You can catch just 100 fish on them all day long and still fish the same fly. But what I also like about the hippie stomper is a lot of the foam flies out there, like your grasshopper flies and things like that, they tend to be really large and oversized. And I mean, on these small streams, you know, big fish are going to be in the 12 to 14 inch range, but the vast majority of the fish you're going to be catching are in that 8 to 12 inch range. And those big oversized foam grasshopper flies, I just miss a lot of fish. But this is a nice size fly. You can get these hippie stompers in sizes, you know, 6, 8, 10, 12. So it's really nice because you can have a foam body fly that has a lot going on, a nice buggy profile, but it's not oversized. So it's a great durable fly, especially as you get into later summer and there's lots of terrestrial insects flying and landing in the stream. So that does it for my top 5 small stream flies. If you have any questions about the flies in this video, just let me know in the comments below. I'll put links to all these flies in the description below. And be sure and hit that thumbs up button if you really liked this video, and be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with my latest content. Hopefully I'll see you out on a mountain stream sometime this summer, or actually, hopefully I won't. Have a great summer trout fishing. I'll see you guys next time.